Welcome, everyone. I'm very happy to welcome you for the launch event of the ESPI short report entitled The War in Ukraine from a Space Cybersecurity Perspective. I'm Clémence Poirier. I'm a CNES-seconded researcher at the European Space Policy Institute, and I will be your moderator today. So in case you don't know ESPI, ESPI is the European think tank for space. We provide decision makers with an informed view on mid to long-term issues relevant to Europe's space activities. And today, I'm very happy to organize the first launch event of a new category of ESPI publications called ESPI Shorts, which are small self-funded research projects that aim at providing a very synthesized and critical analysis over space-related issues that we consider important and or overlooked in the European space policy landscape. And you will see in the coming months two other ESPI short reports, so stay tuned on our websites. So now when it comes to space cybersecurity, why did we decide to address it? And I think it's very interesting that we can look at the literature to understand why this topic is relevant today. So if you see the literature in political science on space cybersecurity, one of the first articles actually only dates from 2013. And Lorenzo Valeri outlined that the interdependence between space and cyberspace makes new threats emerge, which are difficult to map and characterize. Then the same year, Jason Fritz released a report called Satellite Hacking, a guide for the perplexed, which already says a lot, and explained that cyber risk on space systems are too simplified in international relation debates and therefore misunderstood. Then in 2014, Caroline Bailon from Chatham House released a report explaining that there is an incompatibility of public policies regarding cyber threats on space systems in the context of increasing militarization of both space and cyberspace. And then there was a defining report in 2016 from Chatham House again, from David Livingstone and Patricia Lewis, Space, the Final Frontier for Cybersecurity, explaining that cyber risks on space systems are overlooked in public policies. And then several researchers have retook and re-explained and reused research findings of Chatham House. For instance, in 2018, Gregory Falco explaining also that cyber threats are taken into account enough, are not taken into account enough in US space policies, and that it should be one of the main mission of the Space Force. And in Europe, this topic is not addressed enough in the field of policy research, so we decided to address it. And the war in Ukraine was an unfortunate case study to provide a broader analysis on the state of cybersecurity in the commercial space sector in Europe. So let's start now. So for this event, I have the great pleasure to have an outstanding panel of guest speakers. The first one being Niccolò Boschetti, who is pursuing a PhD in civil and system engineering at Johns Hopkins University and is also an assistant researcher at the Aerospace Adversary Lab, also at Johns Hopkins. Then I also have the pleasure to welcome a fellow French citizen, Christophe Roudler, who is a French member of the European Parliament and member of the Renew Europe group. He is the vice president also of the Sky and Space Intergroup at the European Parliament and the European Parliament's rapporteur on the Secure Connectivity Initiatives, which is now called IRIS. Then I also finally have the pleasure to welcome Bruno Vermeer, who is Global Chief Information Security Officer for REA Group. He's responsible for ensuring the application and compliance of REA's information security related processes across all the countries in which REA operates. Bruno was also head of information security at the Belgian National Security Authority for 11 years and the chair of the European Space Program Security Accreditation Board. So the objective of this event is that it is as interactive as possible, so do not hesitate to ask questions in the chat throughout the event. I will definitely pick up some relevant questions as we go. So I will first present our report, The War in Ukraine from a Space Cybersecurity Perspective, and then we will have a moderated discussion with our guest speakers who will present their expertise and their view on this topic. So let's dive in on the content. So what happened was CASAT. So as you know, a few hours before Russia invaded Ukraine, the CASAT satellite suffered from a cyber attack. And it's important to emphasize that there are still a lack of complete and comprehensive information about the details of this event. And it's a great way to also remind that communication regarding a cyber attack is often as important as the attack itself. The lack of information regarding entry points, weak points in the attack surface can make an attack very malleable for both businesses and states. So while Eutelsat did not comment on this event, Viasat provided some partial information on the attack, which seems to have taken place in two stages. First stage, which was a denial of service, conducted against internet modems, which were located in Ukraine and used by the Ukrainian government, the Ukrainian armed forces, and security services. And it seems that malicious traffic was pushed into the network, making it difficult for legitimate modems to stay online. And then a second stage in the attack was that the attacker entered a ground-based network by exploiting a misconfiguration of a VPN appliance, which enabled the attacker to gain remote access to the management segment of the network to upload a wiper malware, erasing the hard drive of CASAT internet modems, disconnecting them, and rendering them unusable. So security researchers have outlined that this information is only partial, and they have published several potential hypotheses to complete the information provided by Viasat. And the first one is that this attack is likely the result of an exploitation of vulnerability on the TR-069 protocol. Viasat has been implementing this protocol on its internet modem since 2013, and it seems that Viasat's SurfBeam internet modem have unpatched vulnerabilities that enabled to install and run applications on them without signature verification or a firmware update, which seem consistent with the upload of the AcidRain wiper malware. Then a second hypothesis that was raised by security researchers was the VPN attack vector, and in particularly the exploitation of the trust relationship between Fortinet, the VPN provider of Skylogic, and the ground segment. So in 2021, Fortinet suffered a data leak, which were obtained from the exploitation of a vulnerability on the user modem. And this vulnerability and data leak was very much exploited and used by Russian intelligence. And it is possible that the CASAT network also did not patch this vulnerability, and it enabled the attack. So I'm sure that Nicolo will also provide additional information on the attack. So the fact that this attack happened is also a great way for us as policy researchers to use it to provide a broader analysis. And the CASAT cyber attack is a good representative case of the state of cybersecurity in the commercial space sector. So first, on the supply chain is becoming a very weak link. According to Unidir, supply chain is increasingly vulnerable, not only because of the globalization of the supply chain and the variety of suppliers in various jurisdictions, but also because companies are increasingly aware of cybersecurity, so they are protecting their companies and their network, but often they forget about securing the supply chain, and it's also very difficult to ensure. Now, if we look at the literature in space policy, we see that according to Scott Millwood, cyber attacks in the telecommunication industry almost always happen in the supply chain. And he takes the example of Airbus, who also suffered from an attack on its VPN networks. And the attackers exploited the networks that the subcontractors was connecting to while manufacturing aircraft, including military ones. So this is something that is not totally new. And it's important to understand that space supply chain is poised to become more vulnerable because of new space. So according to James Pavur from the University of Oxford, new space companies are way more communicative than traditional space actors. They share more information about their system, their supply chain, their contracts, their employees. And while it seems innocent and great to provide visibility to the space sector, this also may give critical information to malicious actors to launch an attack. So it raises a case and an issue to better protect space systems from the beginning of the life cycle to the decommission of the satellite. Now, the CASAT cyber attack is also a great representative case of the cybersecurity in the space sector in the user segment. And in the past decades, security researchers and cybersecurity companies, in particular IOActive, have warned the telecommunication industry over the presence of critical software and hardware vulnerabilities in SATCOM user terminals. And these warnings have largely remained underestimated. So you see on the right of the screen, I highlighted some articles that I really invite you to read, because they're very interesting and also in some ways quite scary, because the authors explain that they find vulnerabilities in user terminals, in SATCOM user terminals, including on terminals that are used by the military in active conflict areas. And they warn the companies about vulnerabilities. They explain them that it's very important, that it could have critical consequences, and sometimes it remains overlooked, and space companies don't necessarily care about it. So vulnerabilities exploited in the CASAT case are actually rather common in the space sector. And what it shows is that basic cybersecurity standards are often not implemented by design, and many open source information can be found online to exploit and take control of SATCOM user terminals. So it also shows that there's a need for a better coordination and communication between the cybersecurity community and the space community. So now that we know a bit what happened and how important it is, we can learn from this attack for the cybersecurity of the European space sector. And the first lessons that we have is that the commercial space systems are easy targets for cyber attack during armed conflict. And this attack demonstrated that commercial space systems are essential tools to support military operation on Earth, but also prime targets to attack. And the threat is real, because Russia officially declared at the UN it will consider private satellites as legitimate targets for retaliation in wartime. And while military satellites are usually well protected, commercial satellites are often crippled with vulnerabilities. And a cyber attack against the commercial satellites may be more dangerous than a cyber attack against a military satellite. Why? Because military satellite operators are used to being attacked, and even they expect to be. As a result, there's a better chance that they know how to react to an attack, which is not always the case in the commercial space sector. And some space companies have voiced their concerns regarding this point at the beginning of the war in Ukraine, outlining that there was no clear process for reporting and responding to a cyber attack. So it really shows the need to have better cybersecurity controls, along with identified policy and legal frameworks for incident response. Then the second lessons that we can learn from this event is that there are endless vulnerabilities on the commercial space infrastructures, and that many entry points can be exploited across the attack surface during one single attack. The management and ownership of commercial space services can be complex, with various companies owning and operating the space, ground, and control segments across several countries and jurisdictions. So threat actors can exploit trust relationships and access privileges between space companies and their IT subcontractors to access networks and data. And it seems to have been the case in the CASAT case. The third lesson is that commercial actors inherit from the threat models of their clients. And it shows that providing satellite services to domestic and foreign armed forces can increase the risk of attack. And if the customer is a belligerent in an armed conflict or is located in a conflict area, the company may inherit from the threat models of that client and be targeted by cyber attacks. It calls for a higher level of cybersecurity of commercial space systems, but also for an update of the threat model of a company when a conflict arises, which also requires a dedicated cybersecurity budget. And this is very important because Elon Musk announced that SpaceX was reallocating some of its resources to cyber defense and anti-jamming to face cyber and electronic threats in Ukraine at the expense of other projects such as Starship and Starlink V2. So now we also see that segregation between civilian and military customers is essential. And the likely lack of segregation on the CASAT network may have led to ripple effects on other systems, including critical infrastructures such as German wind turbines. And in Europe, the space infrastructure is still not yet considered as a critical infrastructure, so it's really important that we change that. Now, the fifth lesson is that military systems should not be considered based on their ownership, but on their use. So considering the essential role of space in military operation and the priority towards commercialization in many European space policies, European governments will eventually rely on commercial systems for many critical operations, including military ones. And if a company is servicing domestic or foreign armed forces, its system should be subject to the same level of cybersecurity and security audits as military satellites owned and operated by armed forces. The sixth lessons that we can draw from this event is that the lack of sovereign space capabilities create a dependence and strategic autonomy issue, which is at the heart of EU policies. So Ukraine right now is entirely dependent on foreign space assets in this war. And whether is it for operating drones, for government communication, for talking to the press, for foreign leaders, and also for the population. So for Europe, we're not in such a situation of dependence, so it's not that bad, but most European states do not have sovereign satellite communication capabilities, let alone military ones. So in case of conflict, their government communication as well as their military operation will be dependent on the quality of their relationship with their allies and their willingness to provide them with satellite capabilities. And with the case of Starlink, it means the quality of your relationships between one company and one person. So it can be very critical. The seventh lessons to learn is the lack of space capabilities also creates a cybersecurity issue in armed conflict. So on the other side, we can also learn from the failures of the Russian military, and it demonstrated a lower use of military SATCOM encryption, and it relied also on insecure communication devices, such as walkie-talkies or private mobile phones, which enabled Ukraine to eavesdrop on many Russian communications. So this cyber operation also demonstrates that the essential role SATCOM play in a conflict to restore connectivity when terrestrial systems are under attack. It also shows how satellites can be tools to face the fragmentation of the internet and information warfare, enabling to control and access the internet. So it shows that there's a need for sovereign satellite communication, and it makes a great case for a European constellation. Now, an interesting case for the last lesson to learn is that rerouting internet traffic strategies make satellites essential in armed conflicts. So Russian cyber operation in the war in Ukraine also illustrate the essential role satellites can play when terrestrial systems are under attack. And there's a researcher, Louis Pétignou. I really likely recommend you to check his work because it's very interesting. He demonstrated how Russia was digitally isolating the Ukrainian territories under its control, and the Russian military and separatists forced Ukrainian service provider to divert the Ukrainian internet traffic to Russia by modifying agreements with autonomous systems via the border gateway protocol. So just so that you understand, an autonomous system is a large network or group of networks with a unified routing policy, which signs agreements with other autonomous systems through the BGP protocol to ensure that data can circulate across the world. And the BGP defines the routes that the data packets take in cyberspace. And it can be manipulated to control and block both connectivity and content. And it led to the fragmentation of Ukraine cyberspace, and it put Ukraine users under Russian internet rules in terms of censorship, control, and access to information, as well as privacy. And in occupied territories, Starlink enabled to maintain a free access to connectivity. So it shows that SATCOM has an essential role to play when terrestrial systems are under attack. It also shows how satellites can be tools to face information warfare, and this is very important to take into account also in the development of the European constellation. So now what do we do with this assessment? There are several challenges. The first one is that with the digitalization of space systems are more vulnerable to traditional cyber threats. So usually it prompts operators to adopt traditional cybersecurity measures, but at the same time, they're not really adequate because the unique nature of space systems and the space environment does not make them work well. Then we see that the EU will soon adopt the NIS2 directive, which will recognize space as a critical infrastructure. So this is very important to pass this directive, but it's also even more important to assist the space sector with its implementation. Now, so the ARIS, the upcoming EU constellation, will also have challenges because it has commercial and security objectives. So it will have to be secure enough for government communication, but it will also have to be competitive and efficient enough for commercial application. And sometimes encryption and all can reduce the efficiency of a system. And also there's a clear need to improve cooperation and coordination between several communities. And I believe that this event is also in some ways contributing to that. So there are several solutions that we can discuss with our guest speakers. So if you have already some questions in the chat, feel free to already write about them. I will now give the floor to our guest speakers. So Niccolò Boschetti, you're a PhD student at Johns Hopkins University, and you recently released an article called Space Cybersecurity Lessons from the Viasat cyber attack for the ASCEND conference. And it provides interesting research findings on the same issues, but from an engineering perspective. So I think it's very interesting. So please take the floor now.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Clemence. Thank you, ESPI, for inviting me today. I will, if it works, I will share my presentation. Yes, as you said, we recently, me, my colleague Nathaniel Gordon, and Professor Gregory Falco, that you already cited, we released a research named Space Cybersecurity Lessons Learned from the Viasat Cyber Attack, where we perform a sort of forensic analysis of what happened during those hours at the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Everyone is talking about this attack because in reality, is the first instance of a cyber attack serving as the first digital strike in a military conflict. Space warfare, cyber warfare is becoming a more and more usual topic of discussion, but this is the first time that a country used space warfare and through a cyber attack as part of the early stages of a military invasion of another country. And on this, probably to better explain our findings is useful to understand what was the KA-SAT network by Viasat. And it was used to provide broadband services across Europe and the Mediterranean basin. So it was used by the Ukrainian army by Ukrainian civil infrastructures, critical infrastructures, but also by emergency service and also private subscribers. Just to understand the architecture of this system, of course, usually space assets and space systems are divided among 3 or 4 segments: space, link, ground, and user. Here in this analysis, we put together ground and user segments. But so we had a single satellite, the one that you saw on the right on the previous slide, that is in geostationary orbit, and it was launched by Russia, by a Russian Proton M rocket in 2010. So this attack is not the first encounter of KA-SAT with Russian capabilities. Then we have the link segment that, as the name of the satellite suggests, is based on Ka band. That is a very performant radio frequency band that is used for large data streams and to provide broadband connectivity, especially for satellites in GEO. And an important detail is that the signal is divided among 82 spot beams that covers the entire European continent and the north of Africa. This is a very important detail to understand why and how Russia was able to carry out this attack. And then, of course, we have the main character of the story, the ground segment that is composed by 3 major elements: the Earth Gateway centers, that are 10 antennas all around Europe that manage both the satellite and the network; points of presences that are namely servers all around Europe that are used to connect the different components of the network on the ground using public ground backbones, so optic fiber. Then we have the surf beam 2 and the user terminals that were the victim of the attack, the one that were disabled, that are a simple modem, Ethernet, and Wi-Fi modem attached to a small antenna that receives the signal from the satellite, very similar to OneWeb or Starlink terminals. And then, of course, the Network Operations Center, the NOC, that after the end users was probably the first element of the network noticing that something wrong was going on. You already described why it happened, so I won't spend much time on why Russia decided to attack KA-SAT, and we can say that they achieved their goal. But the other very interesting aspect of this attack is that we had a collateral damage. As you mentioned before, we had several wind turbines in Germany by the company Euroskypark, more or less 4,000 wind turbines that for days were disrupted because they were relying on KA-SAT modems. And this collateral damage is what made me and my colleagues having a question, if they attack the network, and as you said before, the 2 main vectors were the VPN vulnerabilities and the fact that in the modems there were not updated and not very safe protocols, why we didn't have disruptions in Spain, in UK, in Egypt? Why it didn't happen? Because if we see and we analyze this attack as a problem of just VPN appliances and protocols, it seems like a cyber attack on a space-based network, but where the satellite doesn't have a big role in the story. And from this question, we analyzed the architecture and all the steps of what happened using open source intelligence analysis, reading what Viasat disclosed, make an open intelligence analysis of how Skylogics, the company that managed the network, is distributed among the Europe. And so we think that the attack was divided into 7 steps. Yes, there was the exploitation of a reconnaissance operation of IP addresses and credentials that was, as you said, performed in 2021 on Fortinet VPN appliances by a Russian hacker group, Groove. Then there was the exploitation of these credentials on using internet to access the IP addresses of Earth Gateway centers or POPs. We cannot be sure of this, but probably considering that the main server farm of Skylogic is in Italy, in Sardinia, and there are several endpoints that are open to the internet in that server farm in Sardinia. Probably that was the access point. After exploiting those vulnerabilities, they were able to pass through the demilitarized zone of the network. And then those two steps, the 4 and the 5, in our opinion, are what make this attack particularly interesting, and that's why we think that we must pay much attention to this detail. As I said, the beam of the satellite is divided among 82 beam spots. So you have to imagine Europe divided into 82 circles of 250 kilometers in diameter. And in our theory is that Russia not only was able to get into the network, upload malware, acid rain into the modems that were unpatched and break them and disrupting them, but they were also able to have access to the beam selection functions of the satellite. So this is not only a cyber attack on a space-based network, but is also an attack on a space asset, because they were able, in our opinion, to select specific areas of Europe where to upload that wiper malware and avoid, as much as possible, collateral damages. Because, as you can see, there are 4 beam spots that are exclusively in Ukrainian territory, but all the others on the more west beam spots are partially in a Ukrainian territory and partially in German territory, Romanian territory, etc., etc. So our theory is that they were able to, let's say, reduce as much as possible the collateral damage. We saw some problems, disruptions in Germany and other bordering regions, but this attack is the proof that Russian hackers and the Russian security services in this attack have reached a very high level of sophistication. Because this attack weakens the assumption that every time that researchers, policymakers, military strategists talk about space warfare and space cyber warfare, is that is very unlikely in a conflict situation, because the collateral damages would be too big. They would lead to the intervention of other countries, because if they bricked the entire network, probably there would have been a stronger reaction by NATO countries. This is the proof that is not always true, because if a country, an enemy, an attacker is able to reach a specific level of sophistication, space warfare, also in the cyber domain, can be very targeted and reduce as much as possible the collateral damages. And as you mentioned before, Russia has said that commercial satellites are legit targets in a conflict, and this capability of the Russian forces probably makes us even more forced to think about this aspect. Then you already mentioned several very good lessons learned by this attack, so I won't spend much time on this. I would just like to highlight an aspect. As you said, the biggest problem is a supply chain problem in this attack, because
you're mute, Nicolo.
Can you hear me now? I don't know what happened. I'm sorry. As I was saying, just to quick conclude, it was a supply chain problem. We know that, but in our opinion, one of the main technical lessons from this attack is the fact that the precursor indicators weren't tracked. Since 2012, and especially after the annexation of Crimea, Ukraine has been targeted with a huge number of malwares, also wiper malwares, very similar to acid rain that was used in this attack. And so companies, especially companies like Viasat that have a dual use profile, so are used both by commercial users and military or critical infrastructures customers, must perform a much more in-depth analysis and tracking of precursor indicators and being able to release patches and updates that weren't released apparently or not completely based on that constant analysis of precursor. Because acid rain, the 99% of that malware was already disclosed by both Fortinet and Microsoft months before this attack. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nicolo. And I think you actually already replied to some of the questions that are asked in the chat on the geographical escalation and the widespread of attacks in certain countries. So thank you very much. That was super interesting. I will now give the floor to our European Member of Parliament, Christoph Grudler, who is also the rapporteur for the EU Secure Connectivity Initiative, who is now called IRIS. So could you please present us the main element of this new EU satellite program and how is cybersecurity integrated into this future flagship project?
Good afternoon, Clemence. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you hear me perfectly. I want to first thank ESPI for this invitation and thank them for the very good report on space cybersecurity aspects of the war in Ukraine. As you certainly know, and you mentioned it, I just concluded last Thursday the negotiations on the new constellation of European satellites named IRIS, formerly known as Secure Connectivity. This constellation is the third pillar of the EU space program after the Copernicus satellites for Earth observation, on Galileo, the European GPS with more than 3 billion users worldwide. IRIS will be a telecommunications constellation owned by the EU that will allow for secure communications for governments and citizens. It will be constituted of satellites in different orbits, low orbits, middle orbits, and geostationary orbits. The objective here with satellites at different orbits will be to combine worldwide coverage on low latency connections. One of the key points that I pushed as the negotiator for the European Parliament is the inclusion of space and environmental sustainability. This criteria will be a first of a kind for this type of constellation with requirements on light pollution, space debris, and greenhouse gases. It is not directly linked to your topic today, but I wanted to mention it as it was a big win for the Parliament. Now, regarding the structure of the constellation, it will be composed of two types of infrastructure. First, a governmental infrastructure, which will be used strictly for governmental services. And second, a commercial infrastructure that will be for citizens and businesses. The governmental infrastructure will be used to propose hard-gov services, meaning very robust services using mainly military frequencies with high levels of security, physical and logical security. These hard-gov services could be, for instance, telecommunications with military drones or communications with embassies in sensitive countries, for example, where terrestrial networks could be unsafe. The commercial infrastructure will be used to propose services to citizens and businesses with more classical technologies and types of security. But the commercial infrastructure will also be used to propose light gov services, meaning governmental services that require less protection. An example of light gov services could be firefighters, telecommunications. They need to be secure, but it can easily run on the commercial infrastructure as it is not too sensitive. The distinction between governmental services and commercial services is called, for by your wish, in the ESPI report, and it is exactly what we will have with IRIS. Now, let me give you more elements on the cybersecurity aspects of this program. Beforehand, let me say that cybersecurity is the cornerstone of this new program. Without strong cybersecurity requirements, it will not have any interest. For the governmental infrastructure, there will be a dedicated security monitoring center managed by the EUSPA, is a European agency based in Prague. It will be dedicated to the cybersecurity of the constellation in all its elements. More generally, EUSPA will be in charge of the operational security of the governmental infrastructure. That includes risk and threat analysis, security monitoring, in particular setting technical specifications and operational procedures. EUSPA has already some good experience with the operational cybersecurity management of the Galileo constellation, and I am confident in their capacities. The security accreditation will be done by the Security Accreditation Board of EUSPA. Moreover, IRIS will have a big novelty, a quantum key distribution service. Indeed, IRIS will integrate the EU QCI project, which will be a communication system to transfer encryption keys via a quantum communication technology. What does it mean? Basically, it means that we will use quantum physics to send an encryption key with a beam of light. Because of rules of quantum physics, we will be able to know if the key was intercepted during its transfer, and thus assure its integrity and confidentiality. EuroQCI consists of a terrestrial and a space segment that will allow transferring keys from one side of the globe to the other. As it is a new technology, there will be some tests before its full deployment, of course. A first satellite, Eagle-1, created in cooperation with ESA, will be tested next year. The encryption key will be generated first by a QKD satellite that is sent via quantum optical link to the ground user with the space and ground segments of EuroQCI. After the key is generated and well transmitted, to the ground user, the data can be encrypted with the encryption key via the classical IRIS satellites. When it will be in service, EuroQCI will be the most secure way to transmit encryption keys, especially between European capitals and EU institutions. In parallel with the cybersecurity elements of the IRIS satellites, I want to highlight another European law that will help us to improve the cybersecurity of our space projects. We talked about it before, Clemens, the NIS2 directive. Precisely this month, we voted in the European Parliament for the final adoption of the NIS2 directive, which will impose stricter rules on essential and critical entities, in particular for entities that manage space-based systems. The text is a key step in the reinforcement of a cybersecurity culture, especially in sensitive parts of value chains. Finally, I will maybe like to say a word on the CASAT case. We talked a lot about it before. What I personally retain from it is that the user terminals were the weak points, not the space segments. And here, a big issue is that today, most of the user terminals are conceived and produced outside of the Union. This is why in the IRIS regulation, I added a paragraph saying that the EU should support the development and production of critical technologies in the EU. And here, antennas and user terminals could be included, as they are the entry point for the use of these satellite services. I will maybe stop here, but I hope that these few elements will help you to understand better the cybersecurity aspects of this new program. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Christophe. That was very interesting, and there's already multiple questions in the chat. One in particular that you already answered to, but another one that is there already a role that will be planned for ENISA when it comes to the IRIS program?
I can answer very quickly because I have to go in plenary for a vote session. I'm sorry, it will be short. And if you want to add some more question, I will answer maybe later on my email. Sorry. ENISA will of course help us. It's a reality. It is the agency of the Union for Cybersecurity. That means that there's, of course, a link. And the Commission worked closely with ENISA for that space program, for that IRIS program, I can say. And also in partnership with member states and their own agencies. That it's a collective way, I can say, and we are working very closely all together. Of course, for those cybersecurity aspects, we have to work as a team. If it's everyone is own corner, it will not be a success at the end on the day. Then, for security accreditation, for example, it will be so very important. I'm sorry, but I need to go. But if you have any additional question, please, you can join me very easily. And I used to answer to the email I received. Don't worry about it. Thank you to all the speakers, and I hope I will see you soon for another cybersecurity event, or maybe space event, of course. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Goodbye. Thank you. I will now give the floor to our last guest speaker, Bruno Vermeer, who is the Global Chief Information Security Officer of REA Group. So you're also the former chair of the European Security Accreditation Board. So you have both the public and private hats, let's say. So regarding the private sector, the space economy is attracting significant investments, both private and public, and the EU has chosen to earmark 12 billion euros of investments between 2021 and 2027. So what is the place of cybersecurity in these investments and programs? And do you think from both your private highs and public highs, let's say, has this risk been sufficiently anticipated?
Thank you very much, Clémence. Also, good evening to everybody. Thank you very much for having me here this evening. Also, thank you, Nicolas, for a very interesting analysis that you have made. It's definitely implementing the fantastic report that ESPI has written on the findings of this attack by the Russians. I would encourage you to complement those two findings together and to further elaborate on the report, because I think me as a security accreditor for almost 30 years now, now I've jumped to this private sector since 2 months. This is exactly the evidence that I would look at as an accreditor, to start to investigate the operator, I would say, and the system, in order to identify the weaknesses and the gaps that would be needed in order to mitigate the protection of the environment. So congratulations for this fantastic work. There are some elements from an accreditor point of view that I would complement, that I would add, change. But if you are really of the opinion to continue to develop this report, which I strongly encourage, I would definitely be available to help, because it should be used as a lesson learned. It should not be a report that is being put on site and not being done anymore with it afterwards. It's too valuable on what we are doing today. Space has become critical for our society. Without space elements, we cannot function anymore. Just to come back in the very beginning, as you said, I know I'm active in the private sector for the REA Group, whom is a very important player also in the domain of security. It's a Belgian company, privately owned, doing professional engineering and solution. It's a professional engineering and solution company providing bespoke engineering solutions, system development, especially security services for critical infrastructure in the space domain. So it's maybe important to note. I'm happy to say, indeed, I have a quite long and vast experience in the governmental point of view, not only from a national perspective, but also from an international perspective. And now being in the private domain, again in the same sector, it's quite interesting to work on this domain from the different aspects. When I come back to your question, and I first have to refer to your report, where you state that the word cybersecurity appears only once in the cybersecurity regulation. Although the regulation that Mr. Gruttler mentioned just a moment ago, I had the opportunity to have a first view recently on the text. The word cybersecurity appears more. But we may not forget that this regulation on secure connectivity, or IRIS² cannot re-regulate the other regulations. So it will not change the other regulations. Maybe an important point to take into account for the different points that I would like to mention. But it's not because it's only mentioned once in this regulation that it that there is no a quite good, robust implementation of cybersecurity governance in the actual Union space programs. I've witnessed from the first line that, especially when I speak on Galileo, I cannot speak on the other space programs because they are not that far involved on security. Today, there is a vast implementation on all levels on cybersecurity, from policy point of view up to implementation, including supply chain. It's a very well taught, very well exercised, and very well monitored item through this space component. And Mr. Guttler rightly says it should be taken as an example, not only for IRIS², but for all the other Union space programs. And maybe we should think to make some things more public, that also the private sector could take profit of this policy and governance that is used in the Union, because it has been demonstrated of being of a huge value in the protection and the defense. And I think it would be wise, especially when you take these lessons learned, that we copy, or some elements are copied to the private sector. I will come back to that later on. But we come also from far. When I joined the Galileo Security Accreditation Board in 2010, when it was made formally by regulation, there was no cybersecurity. There was no cybersecurity at all. We may not forget that the entity who built Galileo, which is the European Space Agency, does not have cybersecurity at that time in their convention. It was not in their culture. It was not in their genes. Complete correctively. But time evolved very fast. So it is indeed the Cybersecurity Accreditation Board, I will call it SAP by further saying, that rang the bell already in 2011 and saying, gentlemen of the program, EU program, you have a huge problem. There is a domain that you didn't have covered in the development of your program, which is the cybersecurity. And we said, if you don't do that, we explained what kind of risks that they would encounter. And they took this very seriously. It took some time. They started by developing, and unfortunately, this document is not published, an EU GNSS cybersecurity policy, which is built by the European Union cybersecurity experts. They provided the input for the document. That was the basis of the cybersecurity, what we are having today in Galileo. I reinforce in Galileo. For the other space components, we have EGNOS, we have which is the other GNSS component. We have Copernicus, as mentioned by Guttler, but we have also the other ones, GovSatcom. We have SST. Now we will have IRIS. For this, today, there is nothing. There is nothing in place as there is for Galileo. This does not say there is nothing, really nothing. We have to admit, like, as I said, ESPI, or the Agency of the European Union Space Program, they have developed a very good, robust cybersecurity program in Galileo, which is, from their perspective, is monitoring on a 24/7 basis the implementation of it from an operational point of view. Like for Copernicus, I'm convinced that ESA is doing something similar. We see this done, especially from the European Cyber Education Center they have here in Belgium, where also REA is present, and where we participate in some layers of security in Copernicus. But it's not the same governance as it is for Galileo. And this is a pity. This is a pity because it's a different approach for, say, one owner system of the space program, having applied two different approaches on cybersecurity. It's a bit of a shame. Another point I would like to highlight is the 12 million where you refer to in your question. It stems only from one regulation. There are other regulations, other frameworks that also contribute to the cybersecurity topic of the space programs. We have the Horizon Europe, we have the European Defense Fund, we have Digital Europe, and now we'll have also the secure connectivity or the IRIS regulation, both having their huge budgets that will contribute to the cyber security program of the Union. Coming back to what you mentioning in the report again, has the risk and the question, has the risk been sufficiently anticipated? As a security accreditor, I go with a brush with very small teeth through the report, and I stop at the moment I see an element I don't understand. And in the very beginning, when I read your report, if I would be a security accreditor, the report is written, and I will quote, is based on open source information available at the time of the writing. And the date is August 2020. Already there, me as being an accreditor from an institute, knowing that there is no other report as such in that detail on that topic, I would say, is this normal? Is this normal that we, European Union, invest so much from the taxpayer contributor, and we have to analyze such a big issue for an important environment such as space, which is now critical for our society, and we don't have somewhere a central depository where we oblige to put evidences down for attacks or threats like this. I found this a little bit strange. We should have had this since quite a while, and if there is not, I think we would plead to have such an environment, not only very beneficial for the governmental developments, also most of all very beneficial for the private sector. I think the private sector should also contribute and also deliver in this depository. I think it's a critical element that maybe it's in your report, but I think it's an element that should definitely be taken into account. Do we overall have enough capacity invested of the all budget in these different frameworks? I have encountered in my experience through the years other points that I say that are very difficult to tackle, because one of the elements that is also mentioned in your report is the resources. And hiring from a governmental point of view, security experts with a high-skilled cybersecurity knowledge like Nicola has, it's extremely difficult. The market is so volatile today. The hopping and the gaps there are today in this domain is so difficult that it puts the governmental environment in such a difficult situation that we are not anymore in a position to hire ourselves and to educate ourselves high-skilled cybersecurity experts that I've also experienced in my time, that I could not have the people asked for. We were strongly depending for those knowledge of, we call it seconded national experts, provided by the security services, allocated to, it's all the same in the Eurospace Agency, to the Commission or to the agency in Prague. It was very difficult to have these persons because the member states themselves have the problem. So there is a domain that definitely we need to invest to, that we need to put more effort. Another point you put in your report, which is, I think, crucial, is cooperation amongst the member states. How do we invest in this? It's very difficult. We have to understand that the Treaty of the European Union, when it was created, the member states agreed that security, defense, and intelligence is a matter of sovereignty. And then the Union tries to put together programs on cybersecurity, on a cooperation of member states. I think the Union has to rethink on how to approach this with regard to what is written in the treaty, and we have to respect this. Okay, I think the best way, I think the best reply to the question you have, I think we need to revisit or think again or audit what we have today, because it's a labyrinth of regulation that we have today. Maybe we can start with what we have, which is working very good today. I pointed out the EU GNSS policy, which is an extremely good document, and its reading and also in its implementation and its execution. we should take this into account, taking your report, additional reports, and further findings of the issues on this CASAT environment, and elaborate and try to find cooperation not only in government but also government private to go ahead in this aspect. And I will here conclude the reply, but otherwise I will continue to speak. Give the floor back to you.
Thank you. We could listen to you for hours, I think. Like, thank you for sharing your experience and expertise in both the public and private sector. It's really very insightful, and it provides a lot of lessons to learn as well on space cybersecurity for the European space infrastructure. So now we can move to the Q&A questions sessions with the audience. So if you have any question for our speakers, feel free to write them in the chat. I will pick up some questions. So one question from a participant. Can the speakers mention the intensity of the attacks, and in order to discuss whether such attacks escalate to armed conflicts and armed attacks? So can a cyber attack on a space system be considered as an armed attack under international law and in the UN framework? And what can future measures be implemented? Does any of you would like to answer that question? Very complicated.
I think your report gives a perfect reply on this, because it would be a question that you would need to ask to NATO, because the EU is not a military environment in order to reply a question on military reaction. I think the Union today is only in a capacity to provide a political reaction with regard to defense. And it will then be a constellation of member states or all the member states to react in their defense capacity individually or together. Or we have to ask our dear friends from NATO to understand if the famous Article 5 can be triggered or not. So it's indeed a very complex question. From the EU point of view, as you correctly mentioned in your report, from one member state, the threshold is different than for the other one, depending on their estimation on the gravity and impact they are suffering on a specific attack. So it's extremely difficult to go further in this debate on this topic, and I think for this I cannot explore more. Maybe Clémence, in your report, maybe you can better explain what I've just mentioned.
Nicola, would you like to say something as well?
No, I would just add the fact that the problem with the cyber attacks is that is always very difficult to understand who carried the attack. Like Five Eyes, so US, UK, and also some European countries recognize that the KA-SAT attack was carried out by Russia, but we have no 100% proof. It's quite clear. You connect the dots and you can analyze the wiper and you find some details, some hints of the attack, who was the attacker. But in cybersecurity, that is the main problem. You cannot retaliate against a country because you are 90% sure. Is much more difficult than understanding who shot a rocket to a satellite. That's why I plead for this kind of depository. We should have a centralized depository and provide the responsibility to the Union, especially to the External Action Service and the Council, to conclude on what has been provided in the repository, where there would be the obligation to put the evidences, and based on that we can make this kind of formal declaration, yes or no, depending on the scenario that you need to write before on what you understand on what is a cyber attack. That's why I like your definition in your report very well on the defining the cyberspace, because I've been looking for a good definition everywhere. Even in the only one who has a kind of a definition of cyberspace is the United Nations. The Union, I do not find one. NATO has been very difficult to define one. It's a very complicated definition. I like your definition a lot. And I think I would encourage
the politician, right, or the people who write the legislation to look very carefully to the proposed text you have provided in your report. To start as a basis, to start to understand boundaries and these 3 layers that you have defined on until where we could go and the level of gravity in order to understand what could be recognized as a cyber attack or not. But just a suggestion.
Thank you very much. And to complement, to give an answer to that participant, it's very difficult to assess how international law applies to cyberspace. So the Tallinn Manual of NATO provides good information on the applicability of international law to cyberspace and at what point a cyber attack, it can be considered as an armed attack. However, this is only an academic work. This is not public policy, and this is not what member states necessarily have adopted. And there's only a few states that have published an official document explaining their vision on the application of international law to cyberspace. And among those that did, which is only a few, they don't necessarily say whether an attack on a space system would be integrated into that. Like, does satellites or space systems in general, also in the ground and user segment, are part of cyberspace? This is not necessarily clear in all policies. And also if they would consider an attack on a space system of their own that they operate as an armed attack and or potentially as a violation of their sovereignty. And there's a few schools of thoughts, let's say. Some consider that based on the penetration of system doctrine, that once a system on their territory is attacked and the attacker entered their system, it constitutes a violation of their sovereignty. And you have the Meneses approach, which is more adopted, for instance, by the UK, who considers that there needs to be a certain amount of collateral damage and physical damage similar to a physical armed attack, so that a cyber attack on a space or a cyber attack in general be considered as an armed attack and as a violation of their sovereignty. So this is very difficult to navigate this. There's a goal within the EU to adopt a common position on this. So there's a lot of work to do on this. It's probably unlikely that we come to this in the next few months or the coming year. It probably first will come as at least even gathering the opinion of each member states, and that will be already a good work. So this is a very complex issue, and if you're in academia, I highly recommend you to address this issue.
If I could complement or something more, maybe it's interesting to say as well. Maybe not a lot of people are aware of the council decision that exists on the security of systems and services that are deployed, operated, and used under the Union Space Programme. The famous council decision 698, which was before the council decision 496, where the council has the power when its own systems are used to attack the union itself or one of its member states. This is an area that would definitely be required to be better deployed to also accommodate the private space sector. It would need to be updated in the light of the new IRIS regulation, where the public-private partnership is now regulated. So they would need to find a way on how to develop scenarios under this decision. And I can tell you, I have witnessed the functioning of this decision, which is working very well. So it's exercised on a regular basis, but again, only for the Galileo system. It has been used in the beginning of the Ukraine war for another space system, demonstrated being very effective to remove some space assets on the Ukraine territory. So it's there, it is existing and is working. So it's something as additional to what you said. It's an area which is very interesting to deplore, to look at, but needs a further elaboration, especially to include the private domain, the private sector, and its space programs.
Thank you very much. So this conference is coming to an end. So I will ask a final question to our guest speakers. In your opinion, what is the main free priority that we should have for the European, the cybersecurity of the European space infrastructure? Maybe let's start with Nicolo.
Three priorities. I will start with the first one, then we see if we have other two. No, I think that considering what will be done with IRIS, we talked about it before, and the trends in the space sector in general, I think that and also considering what Bruno was saying, I think that we have to understand that networks like KISAT or other telecommunication Iridium in few years will be probably something of the past. It will be legacy systems. We are moving towards a stronger and stronger interconnection of different assets, private, state, military, and the future in the space sector is the interpolation and integration of data. Is of a few days ago, the news of the DoD, the Department of Defense in the US, that awarded contracts to develop an hybrid space architecture. That means putting together data and the links in space and to the ground. So I think that considering that also Europe is starting to move towards that direction, so integrating Copernicus, telecommunication data with IRIS, etc., that is the biggest problem. Because as Mr. Grubler was saying before, it's important to have domestic production of components. Yes, it's true, because it makes easier the supply chain, to secure the supply chain. But if we are moving towards an integration of data from tens or hundreds of actors, we will never be able to have a completely domestic supply chain. There will always be an integration of private, foreigner, Asian, American, European actors. So that is, in my opinion, the biggest priority. Finding standards and protocols for the integration of different commercial assets inside the state networks. This is the biggest point, in my opinion.
Thank you very much. And for you, Bruno, what would be the biggest priority for the cybersecurity of the European space infrastructure?
I think I mentioned already some points, but again, I would like to reiterate. I think we need to have a space cybersecurity authority in the Union, which handles all the operational aspects and practical aspects, policy aspects for space cybersecurity. ENISA could indeed have a very important role, but maybe it's worth also to mention. It has been the wish of some member states to provide ENISA with an operational role. But I need to go back to what I've said with regard to what we have agreed upon when we have developed the Treaty of the Union, that the member states agreed to not provide any operational authority on security, intelligence, and defense. But it's definitely with not having this, we always say you cannot build the space components by yourself. You need to collaborate. I think it's the same for cyberspace, the cybersecurity of space components. If you do not do it together, it will not work. It will not work at all. So you need this. So the link to that, we need to have a clear and very transparent and a simplified union space cybersecurity policy, which there is a good one. Use this one, elaborate it to the other space components, and include the private sector. And finally, a last priority, if Breton wishes to accommodate small PMEs that have indeed the technology of the future to better protect us, simplify your regulations. If you don't simplify your regulations, the PMEs, they will not join. It became a burden. It became too difficult for them to participate. here I would like to conclude.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentation. That was very interesting and insightful. Thank you for participating. Thank you to all the participants for attending the conference. If you are a young professional writing articles, we are launching a call for papers for a follow-up report on this topic. So if you would like to submit an abstract, feel free to go to our website and submit something. We would be very happy to receive contributions from everyone on space cybersecurity and space security and defense in general also. So feel free to contact us if you have any questions. I was very happy to moderate this event. Thank you very much to Hol, and hopefully see you for another conference.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.